She married 3 men in 5 years. All of them died, and no one knew why. Before we uncover the darkest story ever told about the Carpathian Mountains, tell me, where are you listening from right now? From Paris, Lyon, Marseille, or perhaps from somewhere even more mysterious? Leave a comment below and subscribe to the channel, because the story of the bride of the Carpathians will chill your blood, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens at the end. You'll want to share this story if you dare. Now sit back and get comfortable. What you're about to hear is real. Too real. Winter had descended upon the Carpathians with unusual ferocity. The winds howled through the narrow valleys of Transylvania, carrying with them snowflakes thick as torn feathers. In the small town of Brakov, nestled at the foot of the mountains, the chimneys smoked day and night, and the cobblestone streets emptied the moment the sun disappeared behind the snow-capped peaks. It was in this frozen setting that lived Elizabetha Dragomir, a 24-year-old woman whose beauty had become legendary throughout the region. Her jet-black hair cascaded down to her slender waist, framing a face of delicate features, high cheekbones, full lips of natural crimson, and storm-gray eyes that seemed to look straight into a man's soul. She always wore dark, elegantly tailored dresses that accentuated her slim figure and graceful stride. But it wasn't just her beauty that drew attention. It was something subtler, more unsettling. When Elizabetha entered a room, conversation stopped. Men devoured her with their eyes, captivated by that strange blend of gentleness and mystery that emanated from her. Women, on the other hand, looked away, uneasy before that magnetic presence they could not explain. Elizabetha lived alone in a large stone mansion on the outskirts of Brakov, inherited from her late father, a prosperous merchant who had died a few years earlier. The mansion was imposing, with its tall Gothic windows, dark green shutters, and garden enclosed by wrought iron gates. Inside it was tastefully furnished. Persian rugs, silver chandeliers, and old portraits hung on wood-paneled walls. Everything spoke of wealth and refinement. And yet, despite her material comfort, Elizabetha lived alone. Her servants never stayed long. They spoke of strange noises at night, of doors closing on their own, of cold eyes watching them in the corridors. Most left without warning, abandoning their wages behind. But what truly fascinated the townsfolk of Brakov was Elizabetha's marital history. In less than 5 years, she had been married 3 times. And 3 times she had become a widow. Her first husband, Mihai Corvin, was a respected landowner of 38. He owned several hectares of forest and farmland in the surrounding area. Their wedding, held at St. Nicholas Church in April 1879, had been the event of the season. Mihai was a robust man, with a ruddy face and a booming voice. He drank heartily and laughed loudly, seemingly madly in love with his young wife. Yet 6 months after their marriage, Mihai vanished. One November morning, he left to inspect his lands and never returned. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Villagers scoured the rivers, questioned local inns, but nothing was ever found. Elizabetha wept at the symbolic funeral, dressed in black from head to toe, a lace veil covering her pale face. She sobbed on the shoulder of her lawyer, Mr. Popku, who helped her settle the inheritance matters. According to the will. According to Mihai's will, a document signed only a few weeks before his disappearance, all of his properties passed to Elizabetha. 18 months later, she remarried. Anton Muresan, a 42-year-old timber merchant, fell hopelessly in love with her at a ball hosted by the mayor of Brakov. Anton was a meticulous man with refined manners, a poet at heart who collected rare books. He courted Elizabetha with ardent devotion, offering her jewels, flowers, and passionate letters. Their wedding in September 1881 was more discreet than the first, yet whispers had already begun to spread. "Isn't it strange how quickly she's remarried?" murmured the shopkeepers at the market. "And that poor Mihai who was never found." But Anton paid no attention to the rumors. He was blinded by Elizabetha's beauty, her gentle voice, the way she looked at him as if he were the most important man in the world. 4 months after their marriage, Anton Muresan was dead. Officially, he had succumbed to a sudden fever. The family doctor, Dr. Reducu, an elderly man with thick glasses and trembling hands, signed the death certificate without asking too many questions. Anton was buried quickly on a freezing January day, beneath a sky as gray as the tombstones in the cemetery. Once again, Elizabetha inherited everything: Anton's timber business, his townhouse, his savings. Everything went to her. The third marriage took place in June 1882. Stefan Ionescu, a 35-year-old fur trader, was an elegant and ambitious man who often traveled to Vienna and Budapest. He met Elizabetha during an art auction and was instantly captivated by her. Stefan was different from the first two husbands, younger, sharper, more cautious. He had heard the rumors that floated around Brakov, the whispered suspicions, the sideways glances in drawing rooms. But when he saw her, when her gloved hand rested lightly on his arm and her storm-gray eyes met his, all his doubts vanished. They married quickly in a small chapel outside town. No grand ceremony, no crowd, just a priest, two witnesses, and the whisper of the wind through the pines. Stefan lived with Elizabetha for 6 months during which he grew increasingly nervous, increasingly pale. His friends noticed how he lost weight, how he no longer laughed, how he flinched at the slightest sound. He spoke little of his wife, but when he did, it was always with a strange tone of reverent fear. One December evening, Stefan didn't return home. He was found 3 days later, at the bottom of a ravine several kilometers from Brakov, wrapped in a thick wool blanket embroidered with the initials E.D., Elizabetha Dragomir. This time, the authorities could not ignore the coincidences. The chief constable of Brakov, Captain Vasil Petrescu, a stern man whose face bore the scars of smallpox and whose mustache had gone gray, opened an official investigation. He questioned Elizabetha in the drawing room of her grand house, seated in a red velvet armchair while she served him tea in fine porcelain. "Madame Ionescu," he began, using her married name, "you understand that these circumstances are, to say the least, troubling." Elizabetha looked at him with tearful eyes, her delicate hands trembling slightly around the teacup. "Captain," she murmured in a broken voice, "I am a most unfortunate woman. Fate is cruel to me. I loved those men, each one of them." She let her sentence trail off, a single tear rolling down her pale cheek. Captain Petrescu studied her silently. He wanted to believe her. But something in his instincts, sharpened by 30 years of service, whispered that this woman was hiding secrets darker than the depths of a well. "We shall continue our investigation," he said at last, rising to his feet. "I must ask you to remain available to the authorities." Elizabetha nodded, her face a mask of resigned sorrow. But as the captain crossed the threshold and turned for one last glance, he caught a fleeting expression on Elizabetha's face that froze his blood. For an instant there was no sadness in her eyes, only something cold, calculating, disturbingly empty, something that looked very much like contempt. Spring of 1883 arrived with unusual slowness. The snow melted late, leaving muddy roads and swollen rivers. In his dimly lit office at the Brakov Gendarmerie, Captain Petrescu spent his days hunched over documents, testimonies, and marked maps. The Dragomir case, as it was now called, had become his obsession. Petrescu was not a man easily shaken. He had seen much in his career: crimes of passion, violent robberies, bloody family feuds. But this case was different. It was methodical, premeditated, and it disturbed him to his core. He began by re-examining the circumstances of each death. Mihai Corvin, the first husband, had vanished in November. Mihai's body, had never been officially found. But Petrescu uncovered something interesting while questioning the laborers who had worked on Mihai's land. One of them, an old peasant named Ion, remembered seeing Mihai on horseback one foggy morning, accompanied by a figure in a dark cloak. "It was Madame," Ion said, spitting into the mud. "I recognized her by the way she moved. She was riding that white horse she loved so much." "You're certain of this?" asked Petrescu. "As certain as I am standing before you, Captain." Petrescu carefully noted this detail. Elizabetha had never mentioned that she accompanied Mihai that day. She had always claimed to have stayed home, ill. The captain pressed on with his investigation. He next questioned the doctor who had signed Anton Muresan's death certificate. Dr. Radulescu was an elderly man who had practiced medicine for over 40 years. He received Petrescu in his office, a cramped space cluttered with medical books and bottles of tinctures. "Anton Muresan died of a fever," said the doctor, flipping through his notes. "A high fever with vomiting and convulsions. It resembled an acute intestinal infection." "Did you ever consider the possibility of poisoning?" asked Petrescu bluntly. The doctor looked up, startled. "Poisoning? No, He stopped mid-sentence, frowning deeply. "Now that you mention it, there were some symptoms that, He fell silent, visibly uneasy. "But why would his own wife?" "That's exactly what I intend to find out," replied Petrescu. He ordered Anton Muresan's exhumation. 2 days later, under a sky heavy with black clouds, the coffin was lifted from the frozen ground of the cemetery. A forensic expert from Bucharest, Dr. Ionescu, was summoned to conduct the autopsy. The results were devastating. Traces of arsenic were found in the tissues of the deceased, in quantities far beyond what could be explained by accidental contamination. Anton Muresan had been poisoned slowly, methodically, over the course of several weeks. Armed with this proof, Petrescu intensified his investigation. He visited pharmacies in Brakov and neighboring towns, questioning apothecaries about their sales of arsenic, a substance commonly used to kill rats. In a small pharmacy on Tanner Street, he found what he was looking for. The registry showed that a Madame Ionescu had purchased arsenic in October, just weeks after her marriage to Anton. She had signed the ledger in her elegant handwriting, claiming there was a rodent infestation in her cellar. Petrescu felt his pulse quicken. He finally had a tangible lead, but he still lacked evidence concerning the other 2 husbands. He decided to focus on Stefan Ionescu, the most recent of the 3. Stefan's body had been found at the bottom of a ravine, wrapped in that wool blanket bearing the initials E.D., Elizabetha Dragomir. The gendarmes who discovered it noted that the terrain around the ravine was treacherous, steep, slippery, and dangerous. How could Stefan have ended up there? And why was he wrapped in a blanket that clearly belonged to his wife? Petrescu began questioning Stefan's friends. One of them, a merchant named Georg Popescu, proved particularly forthcoming. Stefan was terrified near the end, Georg said, sipping a glass of brandy in the dim back room of a tavern. He wouldn't say it outright, but I could see it. He was afraid of his wife. Afraid, Petrescu repeated. Why? Georg lowered his voice, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. He told me she watched him while he slept, that he'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her standing at the foot of the bed, motionless, staring at him. Petrescu felt a chill crawl up his spine. He said once he caught her going through his papers, reading his letters, counting his money. When he asked what she was doing, she'd just smile and change the subject. Did he ever speak of leaving her? Asked Petrescu. Yes, Georg nodded. The week before his death, he told me he was planning to go to Budapest. He wanted distance, but he'd signed some documents, a will, I think. He said he couldn't leave until certain matters were settled. A will, Petrescu muttered. Another one. Back in his office, Petrescu requested to see the wills of all three men. What he discovered confirmed his darkest suspicions. In every case, the will had been drawn up only weeks before the man's death. In every case, it left everything to Elizabetha. And in every case, the documents had been prepared by the same notary, Master Dumitru Stoica, a respectable man who had practiced in Krakow for 20 years. Petrescu went to see him immediately. Master Stoica was a portly man with a jovial face who received the captain in his office, cluttered with piles of papers and law books. "These wills are perfectly legal, Captain," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "I advised each of these gentlemen to think carefully before signing, but they were all quite determined." "Was Madame Dragomir present during the signing?" asked Petrescu. The notary hesitated. "Well, yes," he admitted. "She always accompanied her husbands. She said she wanted to make sure everything was in order." "And you didn't find that strange?" Master Stoica looked uneasy, perhaps in hindsight, but at the time she simply seemed like a devoted wife. Petrescu clenched his jaw. He was beginning to see the full picture. Elizabetha Dragomir seduced wealthy men, married them, persuaded them to draft wills in her favor, and then eliminated them, coldly, methodically. But he was still missing one thing, the body of Mihai Corvin. The captain decided to search Elizabetha's property. With a warrant signed by the judge, he arrived at the large stone house with a team of 6 gendarmes. Elizabetha greeted them with an icy calm. "Do what you must, Captain," she said, standing on the threshold in a black dress that accentuated the pallor of her face. "You will find nothing." They searched the house for hours, the rooms, the attic, the cellar. They found nothing incriminating. But in the garden, near an old oak tree, a gendarme noticed that the soil seemed to have been recently disturbed. Petrescu ordered them to dig. At a depth of 1 meter, they found a body, Mihai Corvin. He was still wearing the clothes he had on the day he disappeared. Around his neck were deep marks from a rope. He had been strangled. Petrescu turned toward Elizabetha, who was watching the scene from her bedroom window. Their eyes met, and for the first time he saw something flicker in her storm-gray eyes: fear. The arrest of Elisabetta Dragomir sent shockwaves throughout Transylvania. Newspapers in Brasov, Cluj, and even Bucharest published fiery articles about the Black Widow of the Carpathians and the murderous bride. The illustrations showed a woman with an angelic face, but a demonic gaze, holding a glass of poison in one hand and a rope in the other. The trial was set for early autumn of 1883 in the grand courtroom of the Brasov Tribunal. It was an imposing Hungarian-style building, with white columns, tall windows, and intricately carved woodwork. Hundreds of people came to attend the hearings, crowding the public galleries, hopping to catch a glimpse of the woman everyone was talking about. On the first day of the trial, Elisabetta arrived escorted by 4 gendarmes. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back into a strict bun. No jewelry, no makeup. Yet even in this austere attire, her beauty was striking. Murmurs swept through the courtroom as she took her seat on the defendant's bench, her back straight, her face expressionless. The presiding judge was Mr. Johann Davitsku, a man of 60 with an impeccable reputation, known for his rigor and fairness. He wore his black robe with solemn dignity, his white hair neatly combed, his piercing eyes studying the accused from his raised bench. "Elisabetta Dragomir," he said in a deep voice that echoed through the silent courtroom, "you stand accused of the murders of Mihai Corvin, Anton Merchant, and Stefanescu, your successive husbands. How do you plead?" Elisabetta raised her chin, her gray eyes fixed on the judge with unsettling intensity. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Her voice was clear, confident, without the slightest trace of nervousness. The prosecutor, Master Alexandru Popa, a thin man with a severe face and sharp eyes, rose to deliver his opening statement. He was determined to secure a conviction and had built an overwhelming case. "Gentlemen of the jury," he began, turning to the men seated in their box, "we will prove to you that the accused is a cold and calculating criminal who murdered 3 innocent men for the sole purpose of seizing their fortunes." He then called the witnesses, one by one. Dr. Ionescu, the medical examiner, presented his findings on the poisoning of Anton Merchant. He explained in detail how arsenic had been administered gradually, causing unbearable suffering before death. The apothecary from Tanner Street confirmed that Elisabetta had purchased arsenic in October 1881. An old peasant, Ion, testified that he had seen Elisabetta accompanying Mihai Corvin on the day of his disappearance, something she had always denied. The notary, Master Stoica, explained how Elisabetta had been present during the drafting of all 3 wills, ensuring everything favored her. The gendarmes who had exhumed Mihai's body described the strangulation marks and how the body had been buried in Elisabetta's garden. But the most damning testimony came from an unexpected source, a former maid of Elisabetta's named Maria Tomscu. Maria was a woman in her 50s, her graying hair and gnarled hands bearing the marks of years of hard labor. She had worked for Elisabetta for 6 months, in 1882, during the time she was married to Stefan Ionescu. "I saw terrible things in that house," said Maria in a trembling voice, her eyes carefully avoiding Elisabetta. Eyes fixed straight ahead, unblinking. Maria had just finished her testimony when her gaze accidentally crossed Elisabetta's. "Madame was different," she whispered, when she thought no one was watching her. "What do you mean?" asked the prosecutor. "She was cold, calculating. I heard her talking to herself in her room, planning, thinking. One night, I caught her mixing something into Stefan's wine. When she saw me, she smiled and said it was a remedy to help him sleep. But I saw the bottle she was hiding. It was the same white powder I'd seen in the pantry. Arsenic? Asked the prosecutor. I can't read, sir, Maria replied. But now that I know what happened to poor Monsieur Anton, yes, I believe it was poison. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge had to strike his gavel several times to restore order. Maria continued, describing the oppressive atmosphere of the house, Elisabetta's sudden mood swings, the way Stephen had slowly wasted away before her eyes. Why didn't you say anything at the time? The judge asked. Maria lowered her eyes. I was afraid, Your Honor. Madame terrified me. She had this way of looking at you like she could read your thoughts, and who would have believed me? I was just a servant. When it was the defense's turn, Elisabetta's lawyer, Master Vassal Mihailescu, a man of undeniable charisma and eloquence, tried to plant seeds of doubt in the jurors' minds. Gentlemen, he began, packing the courtroom with measured steps, they present my client as a monster, but look at her. Is this the face of a murderer? He turned toward Elisabetta, who raised her storm-gray eyes toward the jurors. Several of them shifted uncomfortably. My client is a woman who has simply been unlucky, Mihailescu continued smoothly. Is it a crime to be unfortunate? She lost 3 husbands, yes, but misfortune is not guilt. The fact that she inherited their estates, does that prove she killed them? No, gentlemen, it does not. What we have here is conjecture, rumor, and the jealousy of small towns. He then attacked the evidence. The arsenic. Yes, my client bought it from an apothecary to rid her cellar of rats, which is a proven fact. The testimony of that old peasant Ion, his memory is failing, and the strangulation marks on Mihai Corvin's neck, who says they were made by my client. Perhaps he was attacked by bandits in the forest. But despite the defense's eloquence, the evidence was overwhelming. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Elisabetta herself took the stand. She moved with quiet grace, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor questioned her for hours, trying to make her falter, but she remained composed, answering each question with calm precision. I loved my husbands, she said softly, each of them. Their deaths broke my heart. Then why, asked the prosecutor sharply, did you not show more grief? Why did you remarry so quickly? A woman alone is vulnerable in this world, Monsieur le Procureur, Elisabetta replied evenly. I needed protection, companionship. Is it a crime to seek happiness? And the wills, the prosecutor pressed, the inheritances that made you rich. My husbands wanted to ensure I would not want for anything after their deaths, she said. It was an act of love, not conspiracy. The prosecutor changed tactics. Then explain to us, Madame Dragomir, why the body of Mihai Corvin was found buried in your garden. For the first time, Elisabetta hesitated. Her fingers tightened on the railing of the witness stand. I don't know how it got there. You don't know, the prosecutor repeated incredulously. A man weighing 80 kilograms buried in your own garden, and you don't know how he got there. Elisabetta closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something in her gaze had changed. The fragile mask had cracked. Perhaps someone wanted to compromise me, she said in a harder voice. Perhaps someone buried that body to accuse me. Who, the prosecutor demanded, who would do such a thing? Elisabetta said nothing. She merely looked at the jurors, then at the judge, with an expression impossible to read. The prosecutor sat down, satisfied. He had achieved what he wanted, to show that Elisabetta had no credible explanation. After 3 weeks of hearings, the final arguments took place. The prosecutor demanded the death penalty. The defense pleaded for acquittal, or at least mercy. The jury withdrew to deliberate. For 6 hours, the crowd waited in the packed courtroom. People whispered, argued, even bet on the outcome. When the jurors finally returned, silence fell over the hall like a funeral shroud. "Have you reached a verdict?" asked Judge Davidsku. "Yes, Your Honor," replied the foreman, a respected merchant named Pazelsku. "What is your verdict?" "Guilty on all 3 counts." A roar erupted in the courtroom. Some applauded, others shouted. The judge had to pound his gavel again and again to restore order. Elisabetta did not flinch. She remained seated, motionless, her hands folded on her knees, her gray eyes cold as stone. Her face like marble. Judge Davidsku rose to pronounce the sentence. "Elisabetta Dragomir, you have been found guilty of the murder of 3 men. Your crimes are of a cruelty and premeditation that chill the blood. You betrayed the trust and love of your husbands for your own enrichment. Therefore, I sentence you to death by hanging. May God have mercy on your soul." This time Elisabetta reacted. A strange, almost imperceptible smile appeared at the corner of her lips. Then she rose and left the courtroom, escorted by the gendarmes, while the crowd shouted her name. After the verdict, Elisabetta was transferred to a cell in the Brasov prison to await her execution. The date was set for March 15, 1884. A little over 4 months away, Captain Vasil Petrescu, though satisfied with the verdict, could not shake a lingering frustration. He had secured Elisabetta's conviction, yes, but one question still haunted him. Why? What had driven this woman to commit such acts? He decided to return one last time to the large stone house, now sealed and empty. Elisabetta's possessions had been confiscated by the state, and the house would soon be sold at auction. It was a gray December day. A fine snow fell over Brasov, covering roofs and cobbles with a white blanket. Petrescu entered the silent house, his steps echoing on the wooden floor. The smell of closed rooms and dust hung in the air. He moved through the rooms one by one, searching, not exactly sure for what, and clue, an explanation, something that would let him understand. In Elisabetta's bedroom on the second floor, he noticed something he had missed during the first search. Under the bed, partially hidden by the bedspread, there was a small carved wooden box. He pulled it out and opened it. Inside, he found several leather-bound notebooks filled with fine, elegant handwriting, Elisabetta's diaries. Petrescu sat on the bed and began to read, the gray light from the window illuminating the yellowed pages. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. The journals went back many years, long before Elisabetta's first marriage. They told the story of an intelligent, ambitious young girl born into a lower-middle-class family who quickly understood that her beauty was her greatest asset. "Men are so predictable," she had written at 10 years old. "A smile, a look, a few well-chosen words, and they are ready to do anything for me. Father says I should be modest, that beauty is fleeting, but why not enjoy it while it lasts?" As the pages turned, the tone shifted. After her father's death, Elisabetta found herself alone with a small inheritance, enough to live comfortably, but not to maintain the lifestyle she desired. "I want more than this narrow life," she wrote. "I want Paris dresses, jewels, travel. I want people to respect me, even fear me, and I know how to get it." Then came passages about Mihai Corvin, her first husband. "Mihai is a fool," she wrote a few weeks after their wedding. "He drinks too much, laughs too loudly, smells of alcohol and sweat, but he is rich and he adores me. He has already changed his will in my favor. Now all that remains is to wait for the right moment. Petrescu felt his stomach tighten. He continued reading, fascinated and horrified at once. Today I suggested to Mihai that we take a walk in the woods. He was delighted as always. We went to that isolated ravine I had spotted a few weeks ago. I brought a rope hidden in my salt bag. When he bent down to pick up an interesting stone, I did it. It was easier than I thought. He struggled, of course, but not for long. Then came the hiding of the body. I chose the garden beneath the oak. No one goes there. Petrescu had to stop for a moment, nausea rising in him. This woman had described her husband's murder with the same detachment one would use to describe a recipe. He turned the pages and found similar passages about Anton Muresan. Anton is different from Mihai, more refined, more clever. I will have to be more subtle. I bought arsenic today. The pharmacist asked me a few questions, but my story about rats convinced him. I will start with small doses. No one will suspect. Further along, Anton has been ill for 3 weeks. Dr. Radulescu thinks it's an infection. Perfect. A few more days and it will be over. I must admit it is fascinating to see how the human body reacts to poison, the symptoms, the progressive deterioration. There is something artistic about it. Petrescu clenched his fists, feeling anger rise inside him. How could a person be so utterly lacking in empathy, so completely monstrous? The entries on Stefan Ionescu were even more disturbing. Stefan is beginning to suspect me. I see it in his eyes. He asks too many questions. He rummages through my things. I must act quickly. I thought of an accident, a fall in the mountains perhaps. Yes, that would be believable. The last entry was dated a week before Elisabetha's arrest. They're coming for me, I can feel it. Captain Petrescu is smarter than I thought, but it doesn't matter. Even if they catch me, they won't be able to prove much. And if they do, well, I will have lived the way I wanted, rich, free, powerful. How many women can say the same? Petrescu closed the journal, his hands trembling. He had just read the confessions of a psychopath, a woman who had killed coldly, without remorse, driven by greed and an absolute desire for control. He took the journals with him and presented them to Judge David Koo. The judge read them, then shook his head, horrified. "This woman is a monster," he said simply, "a true monster." The journals were added to the case file, sealing any possibility of pardon. Elisabetta Dragomir's story spread as expected. In her cell, Elisabetta learned that her diaries had been discovered. When a guard told her the news, she showed no particular emotion. "That's a shame," she said simply. "I liked writing in those notebooks, it was liberating." The guard looked at her uneasily. There was something profoundly disturbing about this woman, even in prison, even condemned to death. She seemed detached, almost serene. "You don't regret anything, do you?" he asked despite himself. Elisabetta lifted her eyes toward him, her gray irises reflecting the flickering light of the candle. "Regret," she repeated with a faint smile. "No, I only regret getting caught." The guard left the cell hastily, a chill running down his spine. The weeks leading up to the execution were marked by a strange atmosphere in Brakov. The Dragomir affair had captured the public's imagination, and newspapers continued to publish article after article, exploring every sordid detail of the crimes. Crowds gathered outside the prison, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous murderess. Some came out of morbid curiosity, others out of a thirst for justice. Street vendors even set up stalls selling engravings of Elisabetta, pamphlets recounting her crimes, and improvised folk songs about the bride of the Carpathians. Inside her cell, Elisabetta spent her days in an unsettling calm. She read the books brought to her by the prison chaplain, mostly the Bible and other religious works, but showed no sign of repentance. She ate little, slept little, and spent long hours staring through the small window of her cell, watching the gray sky over the mountains. Father Andre, the chaplain, visited her regularly, trying to lead her toward confession and divine forgiveness. He was a gentle and patient man, his face marked by compassion and years of service. "My child," he told her one day, "your soul is in danger. You must repent before it's too late." Elisabetta looked at him with an unreadable expression. "Repent? For what, father? For wanting a better life? For refusing to settle for the role society wanted to impose on me? For killing 3 innocent men?" "Innocent?" Father Andre replied gravely. Elisabetta laughed softly. "Mihai was a violent drunk. Anton was a miser who counted every coin. Stefan was a coward who wanted to control me. They weren't innocent, father, they were simply human." Father Andre sighed, realizing he would never reach the heart of this woman. "I will pray for you," he said, rising to leave. "Don't trouble yourself," Elisabetta replied. "Your prayers won't change anything." As the date of execution approached, Elisabetta received several visits. Captain Petrescu came to see her one last time, driven by a curiosity he could not suppress. "Why?" he asked simply. "You had everything: beauty, intelligence, money after the first murder. Why keep going?" Elisabetta looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because I could, Captain, because it was intoxicating. You can't understand having that power over someone's life and death, watching your plans unfold perfectly. It was like playing chess, except the pieces were real, and I was good at the game." "Until you lost," Petrescu retorted. Elisabetta smiled. "Everyone loses in the end, Captain. The only question is how you play before you lose." March 15th, 1884, dawned dark and stormy. The sky was heavy with black clouds that promised rain. The execution was scheduled at daybreak in the prison courtyard before a limited number of official witnesses. But that did not stop hundreds of people from gathering outside the prison walls, hoping to hear or see something. At 5 a.m., the guards came for Elisabetta in her cell. She wore a simple white dress, a tradition for those condemned to death, and her long black hair had been braided and pinned up. As she stepped into the corridor, lit by flickering torches, she walked with the same grace she had always possessed. No tears, no pleas, no weakness. In the courtyard, a gallows stood waiting. Had been erected. It was a simple but sturdy structure, made of dark wood, with 13 steps leading to the platform, a symbolic number that no one seemed to notice. Judge Davidscu was present, as well as Prosecutor Popa, Captain Petrescu, several city officials, and a dozen citizens chosen by lot to serve as witnesses. The executioner, a massive man with his face hidden beneath a black hood, stood beside the gallows. He had carried out many executions throughout his career, but even he seemed uneasy that morning. Elisabetta climbed the 13 steps without hesitation. Once on the platform, she turned toward the witnesses gathered below. Judge Davidscu stepped forward and read the sentence one final time, his voice echoing in the cold morning air. "Elisabetta Dragomir, you have been sentenced to death for the murders of Mihai Corvin, Anton Merchant, and Stefan Ionescu. Do you have anything to say before the sentence is carried out?" Elisabetta looked at the assembled crowd. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a clear voice that rang through the silent courtyard, she spoke. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I do not ask for your pity. I lived as I chose to live. I took what I wanted. If that is a crime, then yes, I am guilty. But think about this. How many of you have the strength to do what you truly want? How many of you live by your own rules? You condemn me because I dared, because I refused to be what you wanted me to be. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the horrified faces below. You will hang me today, but in 100 years, people will still remember my name. They will tell my story. And you will all be forgotten, buried in nameless graves. So tell me who truly wins. A deathly silence fell over the courtyard. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The executioner stepped forward, placing the noose around Elisabetta's neck. She did not resist, nor did she look away. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, her expression calm, almost serene. May God have mercy on your soul, murmured Father Andre from the foot of the scaffold. Elisabetta smiled faintly. If God exists, she said softly, we'll have a very interesting conversation. The executioner tightened the knot, then turned to Judge Davidku, waiting for the signal. The judge gave a solemn nod. The lever was pulled. The trapdoor opened beneath Elisabetta's feet. Her body fell, the rope snapped taut with a violent sound. There was no long agony, no prolonged suffering. Elisabetta's neck broke cleanly. She died instantly, her gray eyes fixed on the horizon where the first rays of sunlight pierced through the black clouds. The prison doctor approached a few minutes later to confirm the death. He checked her pulse, listened to her heart, and then turned to the judge. She's dead. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Some nodded in grim satisfaction. Others turned away, unable to look. Captain Petrescu watched the body swaying gently at the end of the rope. He should have felt relieved, satisfied that justice had been done. But instead, he felt an inexplicable melancholy. Elisabetta's final words echoed in his mind. They will still remember me. And she was right. Elisabetta's body was taken down and placed in a simple wooden coffin. In accordance with the law, she was buried in the unconsecrated corner of the Brakov cemetery, the section reserved for criminals and suicides. No headstone, no name, only an anonymous wooden cross. But that didn't stop people from coming. In the days and weeks following the execution, visitors began to flock to the dark corner of the cemetery. They left flowers, messages, and small trinkets. Some came out of curiosity, others out of a morbid fascination for the woman who had defied every convention. The authorities tried to discourage these visits, but they continued. The story of Elisabetta Dragomir seeped into local folklore, blending with the ancient legends of the Carpathians. Old peasants began to whisper that a woman in a white dress could be seen wandering the mountains on nights of the full moon, her face hidden beneath a veil, the mark of the rope still visible around her neck. They said she was searching for new grooms, luring foolish men who dared to venture alone into the woods. Mothers warned their sons, beware the bride of the Carpathians. If you see a beautiful woman alone at night, run. For she seeks only one thing, your fortune and your life. As the years passed, the story grew, embellished and exaggerated. Some claimed Elisabetta had killed not 3, but 10 men. Others swore she practiced witchcraft, that she had made a pact with the devil himself. The great stone house where she had once lived was eventually sold, but no one stayed there long. Successive owners complained of strange phenomena, footsteps echoing in empty halls, doors that opened by themselves, and an oppressive presence that seemed to linger in every room. The chamber on the second floor. Eventually, the house was abandoned. Its windows shattered, the roof began to cave in, and the gardens grew wild once more. The oak tree under which Mihai Corvin had been buried grew tall and twisted, its branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal arms. The children of Brakov would dare each other to approach the haunted house. "Go touch the bride of the Carpathians' door," they whispered, but few truly dared, especially at night. Captain Vasil Petrescu retired 5 years after the execution of Elizabetha. He had aged terribly, his hair completely white, his face deeply lined. The Dragomir case had marked him more than he ever cared to admit. On his deathbed, he confided to his son, "I have arrested many criminals in my life, but that woman, she was different. She wasn't insane. She wasn't possessed. She was simply empty, a void beneath a beautiful surface. It taught me that true evil doesn't always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes it wears the face of an angel." Elizabetha's personal diaries, once kept as evidence, mysteriously disappeared from the Brakov court archives in the early 1900s. Some said they were destroyed. Others whispered they had been stolen by a collector of macabre curiosities. But copies began to circulate, painstakingly handwritten, passed from one person to another like a forbidden text. People read them with a mix of fascination and horror, peering into the mind of a murderer without remorse. In 1919, a French journalist visiting Transylvania heard about the legend of Elizabetha Dragomir. Intrigued, he conducted his own investigation, interviewing the old villagers of Brakov who still remembered the trial. He later published a long article in Le Figaro titled "The Black Widow of the Carpathians." It caused a sensation in Paris. The story crossed borders, spreading across Europe. Writers used it as inspiration for novels. Playwrights turned it into chilling dramas. The tale of Elizabetha was transformed, adapted, and reinvented 1,000 times. But at the heart of every version, one truth remained. Elizabetha Dragomir had existed. She had killed. She had never repented. And just as she had predicted, she was remembered. In the unconsecrated corner of the old Brakov cemetery, her nameless wooden cross rotted and eventually fell. No one replaced it, yet people still came, laying wildflowers on the hardened soil, leaving scribbled notes on scraps of paper. And on nights when the wind howled through the Carpathians, when the moon shone between torn clouds, the villagers would shut their shutters tight and whisper an old prayer. A prayer for protection from the bride of the Carpathians. A prayer to keep her spirit buried. A prayer to never again meet those storm-gray eyes in the dark. Because some stories never die. They live in whispers, in nightmares, in warnings passed from generation to generation. And the story of Elizabetha Dragomir, the beautiful murderess who killed without remorse and died without fear, would haunt the Carpathians forever. Too macabre to be forgotten. Too real to be ignored. Too terrible to be anything but true. A chilling reminder that true evil can wear the mask of beauty. And that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like a bride in white, smiling softly, while holding a rope behind her back.